This is BBC Radio 5 Live.
With Stephen Nolan.
Now, David Cameron this week announced a series of measures to crack down on online child abuse, as he told an international summit in London that it was happening on an industrial scale. Among those measures, a new law to stop paedophiles asking children to send explicit photographs of themselves. There was also no mention of an idea put forward by the Chief Constable of Norfolk Police, Simon Bailey. In his role as lead officer on child abuse, he suggested that thousands of people who view child abuse images online should be treated as patients by the NHS rather than sent to prison because they pose no threat to children. The National Crime Agency says there are 50,000 people in the UK regularly viewing indecent images of children. So what is the best approach to tackling some of these tricky issues? Well, you're going to hear an interview now which some of you may feel is uncomfortable to listen to, but which we think is worth hearing as part of the wider debate. 5 Live was contacted last month by a listener who went to prison after being convicted of downloading thousands of indecent images of children. We're going to call him Phillip. Phillip had been through a number of treatment programmes and told us he got in touch because he wanted to send a message to anyone who was looking at similar images to come forward and seek help. 5 Live decided to meet him, and we brought with us a man called Duncan Craig. Duncan was abused as a child and had photos taken of him during that abuse. He founded the victim support group Survivors Manchester. We're going to hear from Duncan's interview with Phillip now. Again, you may find some of this uncomfortable to listen to. Duncan began by asking Phillip what led to his crime.
When I was approached by 5 Live to see whether I'd like to come and do this, my interest is, where was that thing in your mind, or do you know where that thing in your mind was that sort of went, well, this is okay, but that's not?
No, there's never a time when you think it's okay.
Okay.
You know all the time. Everyone who's out there at the moment who is doing this stuff, who is looking at these images, knows it's not okay. But they just do. They just sort of almost divorce the reality of what's happening on a 2D screen from something that would happen right in front of you. You're in a different mindset.
What I find interesting is that what you're saying is that someone has the ability to hold an idea, this is wrong, that children are being sexually abused, are being harmed, at the same time as being, would you think it's fair to say, drunk on lust?
I know it was wrong. I knew what I was doing was wrong, but it sort of evolved over a period of time from looking at consenting adult pornography and abuse, and just slowly it went worse over a matter of time until you were looking at images that were without a doubt very abusive images. But it was the lust aspect of it, and it seems to disable empathy. And afterwards, that's when the shame kicks in, and you can't understand why you've done something so absolutely awful. I just couldn't look at myself in the mirror. It was just utter insanity.
Yeah, and that feels a little bit like that's in hindsight, you know, so now you can sit and you can think, I don't know how I got myself to that. And we often think about that when we feel guilt and shame. As a victim of sexual violence, I often had sat with guilt and shame, the guilt thinking it's my fault. So I felt like I couldn't speak out. So I felt like it was all my fault. So me going back to the place where I was abused on a weekly basis, that was my fault. I held all of that until, you know, from years and years of therapy and understanding sexual violence and sexual violation, to begin to understand actually that's the way that an offender will, in his psychology, will often overcome internal inhibitions. At what point does someone say, no, enough is enough? Because it sounds like you weren't saying that.
When you're looking at these images, everything's disabled. It's a real odd sensation, the way other emotions just take over your brain. But it does slowly get worse. I'm not talking of over a few weeks. This was over a period of years, the way you were just pushing them.
How many years?
You're talking of nearly 10 years.
Okay.
I'd say nearly 10 years. Slowly looking at things I shouldn't have looked at. It was my fault. I'm totally responsible. It was vicarious abuse.
I'm interested in that. I hear that quite a lot, you say. Because I used to hear it when I worked with sex offenders within drug services and stuff. What do you mean?
If you're carrying out the abuse and I'm looking at it, I'm involved almost on your behalf.
Because one of the ways that I think about the victims here is every time you open a image or a piece of film, that it's not vicarious at all, it's direct, because you're another person who's seen that person being sexually abused. You're another piece of his or her shame. Does that make sense?
I can understand it, certainly from your point of view, who's suffered direct abuse. Yes, okay, yes.
And I think,
I can empathise. It's abuse. It's direct abuse.
Yeah, and it is. And
I agree completely. Yeah.
I struggle with some treatment programs that talk about indecent images of children being vicarious because of the things that I've said already. One of the things that I'd quite like to maybe know and be interested in is, so how did it stop? What happened that day that you were arrested?
I just came home from work as normal when the doorbell rang, opened it, and there were 3 men there in plain clothes, and almost instantly I knew what they were there for, because I knew I was doing wrong. I thought the only way I could have stopped was someone stopping me. Hopefully I was thinking it would have been someone close to me.
Sure. I think the thing I find difficult, everything that you talked about there felt like, to me, as I was listening, felt like you were kind of absolving yourself of all responsibility.
I couldn't confide in anyone because of the awful stigma associated with such a crime, with such a behaviour.
So there's something about, like you couldn't tell anybody because the stigma. I mean, I kind of challenge you a little bit on that and say, actually, probably you couldn't tell anybody because you knew it was wrong and
yes.
You knew the consequences, which is nothing to do with stigma and everything to do with the fact that you knew the moment you did, your whole life would change.
Not necessarily, no. If I'd confided in someone very close, a close friend, not necessarily she might have helped. And I might have been able to stop it in its tracks and seek help. And anyone who is viewing these images does need psychological help.
That's our common ground. I completely agree with you.
Yes.
We do need to find solutions. But you said yourself, you absolutely, the only way this was going to stop for you is by an external party stopping you doing it. Let's just say that there's some national perpetrator telephone helpline, so to speak. The government would find money and this would be something that's rolled out. What would have helped you pick up that phone to say, I'm doing this, I need help?
Even though you'll become completely obsessed, there will be a chink in the armour of that. There will be a time.
So what was your chink in the armour?
I did try on occasion.
So tell me about that then.
To tell them I did try to confide in someone, but it just didn't happen. I used to go through this cycle of destroying a laptop.
Okay.
And only within a few weeks of buying another one and starting all over again. Because I hated myself doing this. And yet, within a few weeks, I was buying another laptop and I was doing the same thing.
So if you go into the shop to buy a new laptop, having destroyed one, so the destruction of it is you saying, this is disgusting, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
But at the point of purchase,
yes,
you knew exactly what you were buying your laptop for.
Well, no, you were almost in denial then. Oh, I need a laptop because I need to have a look at my emails and just chat to my friends.
Sure. And I suppose it's another, for me, it poses the same question of you've taken some effort to actually stop something and yet you make a tremendous amount of effort to start it up again, which kind of leads me back to your point then of saying, well, how the heck can someone stop themselves if they're that, as you are kind of claiming, I think is the right word to use, that you are totally unable to do anything. How can anybody else stop themselves?
Everyone who's doing this at the moment will know it's wrong, and there'll be just something inside them that will say, I do need help, I do need help. And there's just something small part of them might just be able to make that call, even though they're completely obsessed and immersed. Sure. And that's what makes it so depraved, is the lust side of it is depraved.
I suppose in a way that's where we end up not being on common ground. I don't think that the man that abused me was lusting after me. I think what he was doing was completely taking my power and control. But I think it's too easy to kind of say, oh, it's just lust, because You know, I've lusted after many people over my time and I haven't committed sex offences against them. I suppose one of the other kind of things that interests me as a psychotherapist, as someone working in this field, what stopped you physically abusing somebody?
I just couldn't do that. I don't know. There was something, I just couldn't do it. Once the computer was switched off, it wasn't there. No way. There was just no attraction. Never has been and never has been.
Okay. Do you think it's a possibility? Do you think people do that?
Oh, yeah. There will be people who will do that, yes.
I kind of feel like what you're saying is that would never have happened even if you hadn't been stopped. If you hadn't been stopped, you would never have come offline. There must have been something at the beginning that you kind of went, oh, I'm not going to look at that, and then you moved on to that. And
you're always inquisitive, isn't it? There's inquisitiveness. You're curious to see sometimes you look at one thing, you look at it and you know there's no way ever you can look at something like that again.
And then you move on.
And then you move on.
Sure.
Yes.
And I suppose I'm still really interested in, and I don't think I'm going to get the answer. You were saying to yourself, I can't look at that, and then you did. And you moved on and you moved on and you moved on to other things. You know,
on a screen, on a 2D screen, okay. Yes.
We kind of talked about kind of like, you know, the idea of escalation and all that kind of stuff. And I suppose it leaves me with that question of what stops you re-offending? What stops you going home and switching your new laptop on and downloading more images of children being sexually abused?
Well, there's nothing stopping me whatsoever. I could go home right now if I had that state of mind and start all over again. But I do have a different mindset now. I've had some treatment programs which I think have been very successful. I feel like I am back to my former self, the person I was before I started looking at this stuff. So I do have a laptop. I do browse the internet, but I don't look at pornography, full stop.
So you're saying the kind of that thing about lust that just completely consumed you last time, you don't have that anymore?
I do have a sexual instinct, a natural, normal sex instinct. Yes, I do have that. Thank heavens. Yeah.
Okay. But what's different with that and lust? How do you manage, I suppose, how do you manage yourself now? How do you make sure that it doesn't happen again?
I just don't look at any pornography now. I don't know what will happen in the future. I hope I will never go down that path. I hope people who listen to this don't go down that path. But I can only speak for myself, and I cross my finger and hope I will never be tempted with anything like that again. I really do have a different mindset now. I do have a lot more empathy now as to what people are going through, what children are going through on the other side of that screen. I truly do. Sure.
So if you were tempted, so to speak, again, because I'm using that because you just used it, what do you think you would do differently this time?
If I was tempted, what I would do different this time, I just wouldn't succumb to that temptation.
Okay.
That's as simple as that. Don't click on that website. Don't succumb. Don't just simply don't go there. Don't look.
Well, Duncan Craig, who carried out that interview, is with me now. It's really fascinating stuff, Duncan. Good evening to you.
Good evening.
Do you believe him?
I want to. I do want to believe him. But just listening to it again, that's the first time I've heard that. There's so many holes in his argument. You could kind of drive lorries through it. And I guess, sat here, no, I don't believe him.
Why not?
I suppose because in one sense he's stating, and very articulate man, and he's stating that he had no control. So he's absolved himself of all responsibility. He had no control. He clicked on this website, which led him to another website, etc., etc. And before he knew it, he was kind of consumed by this lust, using his words. And now he's been through a couple of behavioural programs, and he's now saying that won't happen again. And I suppose I just find it really difficult to kind of believe, in one sense, someone can be so driven, and then in another sense they can't be, in such a short space of time. Because I mean, since he was arrested and found guilty and served a prison sentence, it was a really short time between then and now. So I find that really difficult. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I find it difficult.
And he was clearly distinguishing in his mind, you could hear it when he was talking there, between the fact that he had not physically abused someone and the abuse that he did undertake by viewing images.
I mean, what you kind of didn't hear is that there was a part of the question, there was a part of the interview where he said when he was speaking to those other idiots, and I misunderstood him. I thought he was talking about the children, and I was kind of a bit like, that's not very nice, kind of talking about victims as that. And he said, no, I mean the other men. And I said, oh, do you mean paedophiles? And the look of horror on his face really kind of spoke to me about something about he really isn't connecting with that. He's not connecting with what it is that he's done. And the screen, in effect, was his way of disconnecting from the actions of what he was doing or the actions of what people were doing that had created these images, which meant that he was disconnecting from the victim. He really did see that to begin with as a completely victimless crime.
How old were you when you had photographs taken of you?
Probably around about 13, 14. And I say probably because, even after all of the therapy that I've been through and the work that I've done, sometimes I'm still really sketchy on dates and stuff. And that's partly because the person that abused me, he made everything so kind of normal, so to speak. He made it feel like this is just what happens, that, my mind is kind of in that state of flux of, what's real and what's not real.
And how old are you now?
Nearly 40.
So some over 20 years later.
Yeah.
Over 20 years later, can you just say out loud what abuse does to you when you are photographed?
Yep. It just takes away your sense of self. I've talked about kind of attacking the very fabric of masculinity, and for me, I mean maleness, everything to do with who I am, what I am, why I am, kind of a sort of a bigger existential kind of question, really. But it makes a person feel, and it made me feel completely confused, not knowing who I was, not knowing what was real and what was not real. It led me to really have to find some very unhealthy coping mechanisms as I got older and older. I had huge difficulties in relationships, and I don't just mean kind of with partners, I mean with friends, I mean with teachers, with later on with work colleagues. I stopped trusting anybody. I kind of went into a complete and utter shutdown of I need to protect myself, and not only do I need to protect myself, I need to become another person.
Emma Hard's been listening to this, formerly at CEOP, the organisation which serves to protect children from sexual abuse and exploitation. Emma, good evening to you.
Good evening.
When you hear someone like the man Duncan was talking to there, he was trying to sound, and maybe he did to some people, like he was very, very sorry about it. He had learned his lesson and he could never do it again.
Yeah, and that's quite common. To a certain extent, some of that would have been genuine. I'm very sure that he is deeply regretful that he ended up in the situation that he is. But I also share Duncan's views that he was being very duplicitous at particular points in that interview, particularly when he's talking about his role in it and the fact that this wasn't some organic process that he went on. This was him making choices. This was him having a motivation to view those images. And what was missing from Duncan's interview, which would have been really interesting, would have been asking him what he was doing, what he was thinking about whilst he was viewing the images. Because people don't view indecent images of children simply to see them. What we know about offenders is they're viewing them because they are fantasizing about sexually abusing children. So his entire premise comes unstuck when you start thinking about the fact that that's exactly what's going through his mind. He's thinking about sexually abusing children while he's viewing them. And if you're saying that, what you can't say is that you're not at risk then of directly abusing those children yourself.
Well, what does the evidence and research say, Emma, in terms of for those people who fantasise about sexually abusing children, how many then go through
it depends.
to physically abusing children?
I mean, we can similar to not being able to extrapolate about exactly how many people are abused. We can't say how many people offend until we've discovered that they have done. There's lots and lots of studies that have looked at the links between direct abuse and abuse through viewing indecent images of children, and the percentages range from between 1 and 85%. Probably the most interesting recent study was done by McCarthy in 2010, where she interviewed people who've been convicted of indecent image offences, and 84% of those had acknowledged through her study that they'd previously sexually abused a child before accessing indecent images of children. So it's really, really important that people don't think of this as a linear process, that somebody stumbles across indecent images of children and then becomes a child abuser. Actually, people who are accessing indecent images of children have that sexual interest in children. Many of them have already abused, and the role of those images is to continue that fantasy in their heads.
Duncan?
And what you were just saying there, what was kind of missing from the interview, it was just missing from the edit, actually, because it is a conversation that we had where he said, because I kind of asked pretty much the same question of what you were just saying then, kind of what was going through your mind, and actually what it was some sexual gratification, and when he was thinking about it beforehand, and he was thinking about it leading up to clicking on that mouse button as well.
Yeah, of course he was, and at the times where he's getting rid of his computer, or closing the computer down, and he's saying once the computer's turned off, it's not there. Of course it's there. He's
Absolutely.
already said that he's obsessed. That's what led him to turn the computer back on or to buy another computer. He's continually thinking about sexual abuse of children.
Okay, Emma, thank you very much for coming in tonight. Duncan, we wish you well, and thank you for doing that interview. Thank you very much.